Financial resources play a pivotal role in the execution of government policies, programs, and projects for the overall development of Nigeria and Nigerians. However, when there is paucity of funds, countries borrow from international monetary institutions, organizations, as they are unable to generate enough funds domestically to carry out and execute their plans. In 2023, Nigeria's debt profile reached a whopping $108.8 billion. Now, this represents an increase of 123% since 2012, a rate roughly 6 times Nigeria's growth rate of GDP. So on the program this morning, we're going to look at Nigeria's growing and rising debt profile and how this trend is apparently not taking a break and how it is likely going to impact Nigeria's economic recovery as well as growth. Join us on the show. 2 guests virtually. Wilson Agaba is a financial consultant and a public affairs analyst. We also have with us, join us virtually this morning, Steve Nwachukwu, who is an economist and lead researcher at Leeds Assets Management Limited. They both joined us via Zoom this morning. Gentlemen, good morning to both of you, and thank you very much for joining us on Daybreak this morning. So, let me first of all get your thoughts, Mr. Agaba. Nigerians have pretty much, the verdict is out. Nigerians don't like this heavy borrowing spree that our government has been on for years. Your thoughts as, as an expert, looking at the dangers as well as the positives, because we're meant to understand that borrowing is inevitable for governments. Okay, I think we have a challenge with the connection to Mr. Agaba, so I'm going to channel that question to Steve Nwachukwu now. Your thoughts on what you make of our borrowing trend. Is this an overall bad or a net positive, looking at what we've had to incur for over the past couple of years?
Okay, thank you once again. First and foremost, the concept of budgeting and having a deficit and government have to borrow to augment the aspect of the deficit where they have shortfalls in revenues to accommodate such limits of funding government projects. One would say for sure, there are pros, there are good aspects of borrowing, because, for instance, Nigeria needs more than 150 billion to 100 to 150 billion to finance its infrastructural deficits. Annually, we need close to 150 billion to finance most of those deficits in health sector, in agri sector, in transportation, in aviation, in works, name it, all areas of our critical national sectors or infrastructures where we have deficit. We need a lot of spendings to actually meet up with the rest of the world. So the idea of borrowing becomes so exigent for a developing country, Nigeria, to meet up most of those infrastructural deficits. Yes, on one hand, there is need to borrow to meet up those very deficits. On the other hand, is the efficiency in spending such borrowed fund. That is where we have issue. Two of them are not coming together. There is no convergence of these very two needs. One, we have need to fix, develop those decaying infrastructures or infrastructure areas that we have been looking for such infrastructure so that we can have the economic growth above 7 to 8%. If you don't have such infrastructures, take for instance infrastructures in areas of power generation. We are still talking about 4,000 megawatt supply or distributions. Yes, we have close to 10,000 installed capacity of such infrastructures to generate electricity, but we have not developed the distribution end of it so that we can evacuate these 10,000 that we already have infrastructures, or we already have the capacity, installed capacity to generate. So this is where the issues are. We as a nation and the leaders we have been privileged to be having in the last decades have not been this aggressive in developing these infrastructures. When they actually borrow, take for instance, this last administration of former President Muhammadu Buhari, he borrowed to the tune of $60 billion, to the tune of $60 billion, only President Buhari administration borrowed. And this 60 billion, we can't find those infrastructures that are needed. So this is where the real challenge, there is no convergence or there is no evidence of most of this money that's been borrowed. There is need to borrow and fix this infrastructure. There is need to develop this infrastructure. We don't have sufficient resources to develop this infrastructure by ourselves. We need some level of borrowing. We need some level of partnership from private sector. We need some level of sincerity in application of these very mega resources. This is where we have challenge. There is nothing wrong in borrowing.
Yeah.
But the issues are where you deploy this money.
Right.
What are the deliverables?
Right.
What are those evidence that this money that you have borrowed are actually, making life better for Nigerians?
Just help us make sense of why this trend is apparently multiplying from administration to administration. It seems that we are accruing more debt, and it looks like it's almost an inevitable phenomenon now, where the Tinubu administration is adding fuel to the fire, apparently, as Nigerians have had to share their opinions over the past couple of weeks, when the president sent multiple requests to the National Assembly for more loans to deliver on issues around palliatives and economic recovery plans to help rejig Nigeria's recovery. Give me a sense of what is missing here, aside from just the implementation itself. Why does it appear that we are not able to widen our revenue base enough to decrease the need for external funds to meet our budget deficits?
Oh, thank you so much. One, beyond even widening our revenue base or our national tax nets, we also have issues in planning. Where are these areas that these monies has been employed or deployed? What are these areas? Are they critical? Do they have an impact to the economy? Can they generate revenue on it? Those projects, can they actually generate revenue to be able to repay most of these very loans? This is where the issues are. One is the planning, which is the budget in itself, and also some level of frivolosities of such budget line items, of such projects that government wants to deploy this borrowed fund. Yes, we know we have challenge in the issue of revenue generation. Like I said earlier, Nigeria needs more than 100 to 150 billion investment in infrastructure annually to develop most of this decade infrastructure. Like I talked about the education, we need a lot of investment there. In health sector, we need a lot of investment in our health sector. In transport, aviation, name it, even the roads. We need a lot of investment, and we need more than $100 billion investment in infrastructure. How much is the size of our 2024 annual budget? It's less than $37 billion. But we need more than $100 billion to fix this infrastructure. How be it? Now we are concerned of most of us is the proficiency in spending these mega resources. Yes, we also need to channel. That's when I talked about there are three legs. One is the planning. Plan takes care of the areas that you want to invest, you want to deploy this money. Are they rich enough? Can they multiply the investment deployed in those sectors? Can they regenerate revenue for you so that you can open up your economy, so that you can widen the tax nets, not on paper, just like we have had President Tinubu talked about lifting it from 10% to 18%. It's not just by paper. We need to see realistic things. We need to see some plans on ground that shows you actually aggressively looking to widen your task net, not task burden. So planning has a lot to do. Planning tells you where you want to channel these funds. And government has to be sincere in this area. Then we have issues of corruption right in there, which you can talk about the wastages, the over-invoicing, and the rest of them. A project that ought to cost $1 million is costing Nigeria more than $1.52 million. So you see some wastages also in those. So when you borrow to deploy such resources in such wastages, in such over-invoicing, in such areas that you needed to be efficient in spending such resources. So planning has a lot to do. Planning is the basics. When you have a national plan, economic growth, national economic growth plan that tells you this is where we are heading, we need a $10 million or we need a $1 billion investment in our roads. And it follows through plan, and efficiency in costing, efficiency in deploying those resources, and take away those velocities, duplications, over-invoicing, and wastages. That is where you have the efficiency
Steve,
you needed.
Steve, you have to, let's take a pause on what you're saying there. Right now, we have Wilson Agaba joining us. Wilson, let's talk about what is happening, about this trend of borrowing. The fear of, every Nigerian is the fact that the money that these people borrow from the federal government, of course, intend to be used for infrastructure. At the end of the day, the work gets stopped. The infrastructure project that they start does not even get finished for it to even yield money that could actually get more growth and then give back that loan. So at the end of the day, we are now borrowing for just spending, wasting it on some project, then getting something like crude oils to start using it to pay back. So Nigeria is stuck. So what is the implication for Nigeria, in the future? We're talking about the long-run challenge, the long-term challenge when it comes to the economic situation in Nigeria.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And like Mr. Steve has rightly said, the reason we borrow is because our leaders lack what I want to call sincerity of purpose. They don't actually have a good plan on ground on how to expend this money. Like we have all maintained, borrowing has never been a bad decision for any economic entity, including countries. However, how do you apply borrowing? If you borrow money, you must apply it in such a way that it will not only return the principal, but also give you a good return. But obviously, we have leaders who don't even want to explore long-term option of improving our revenue. Look at the revenue of a country like the United States of America, for instance. They have huge revenue because they have more than 150 multi-billion-dollar global enterprises coming out of that country. So one company alone can pay tax that is more than the total tax that Nigeria will collect from corporations in Nigeria. So because we don't do these things, we keep borrowing. And this borrowing is not going to augur well for us in the long term. Why is that so? Most of this borrowing come with conditions that sometimes are not even financial, conditions that are inimical to our own economic growth, conditions that are inimical to our own currencies and all of that. And then generations after us will continue to bear the burden of this borrowing. So it is imperative for us to begin to sit down and look inwards and say, how can we generate more resources within the country? We need to begin to bring efficiency to governance. For instance, look at the cabinet size of the current president. 48 ministers, if I may, and then all of them will have SA, PA, PAs to their PA, SA to their SA, and all of that, all being paid from the government fund. Look at the 2024 proposed budget. 9 point something trillion is budgeted for overhead cost. That is recurrent cost, something you pay to service salaries, allowances, and all those flavorities of the leaders. But how much do we have for infrastructural development? The main aspect that should bring us profit in the long term. We have 8 point something trillion. So you can see our wasteful spending is more than our strategic spending. And if you look at it, when this budget is signed into law, and by the time they begin to implement this budget, you see that a huge chunk of that 8 point something trillion will still be lost in corruption. So we have a lot of things to do in order to get the country on the right track. But that will not happen by leaders going cap in hand, begging for foreign direct investment everywhere around the world and wasting our resources. We need to sit down, sit on the table and draw our plan and come up with how we are going to follow it to the end.
Mr. Agaba, if I could just ask this, for a lot of people listening, right, Nigerians, we obviously know that there's a difference between when a company wants to borrow, for instance, right, to invest in its operations and then make profit. And then there's a difference with, when a government borrows, because mostly government is not trying to make profit, it is trying to bring about developments that could definitely add value to the lives of its citizenry, which will definitely be the main objective of all of that. And for most Nigerians, we have not really seen value for all the funds and the headache that comes with international borrowing. But give me a sense of, especially when we compare the apple and orange in the case of the United States, because we also know that this is another public debate that they're having in the US. They're not particularly comfortable with their, trillions of dollars in debt. I mean, they do have the advantage of being a reserve currency, so that gives them an edge. And it doesn't, look fair to compare them with Nigeria. But give me a sense from your expert view, what is the international best practice that Nigeria should be implementing here? Because the last time we checked, the last finance minister was talking about debt to GDP ratio is still pretty much aligned with international best practices. What do you make of that? And what do we also need to do as a people to cut our cloth according to our size?
Well, basically, like you mentioned, I would like to bring in the issue of the United States of America, for instance. You don't see, how many times have you heard the case of a public officer cutting away with $100 billion here and there, and then the judiciary is telling them to pay 100 million, and then they go scot-free? You're hearing plea bargain up and down. That doesn't happen. America's budget, a huge chunk of it goes into security, a huge chunk of it goes into their international relations and all of those things. We know that they also sponsor, support their allies in terms of war and all of that. This is where their money goes. But why are they doing that? It's for a long-term economic benefit. You see that when America supports a country, they get a lot of resources from that country at a very cheap rate. And that is helping their life as a country. In Nigeria, are we strategic about our spending? That is what we are saying. Now, we are still within the right range of debt to GDP ratio. I don't want to start talking about the integrity of the data that gave us that debt to GDP ratio, because transparency is something that we can only dream about in our own public space. So let's assume that the debt to GDP ratio is still okay. What of development to debt ratio? How well have we applied the borrowings? So it might be within the international best practices that our debt to GDP ratio is still within range, but is our development at par with the international best practices? These are the questions we need to ask. As for what Nigerians can do, we can only advocate like you are doing today. Your organization has decided to put this issue on the front burner. People like myself and Steve Nwachukwu have decided to sacrifice our times, bring our expertise to come and enlighten Nigerians. We expect that everybody should pick this up and also talk about it. Civil society organization, We need to start correcting this from election processes. When a man comes to you and say, I'm going to give you 5,000 naira to vote for me, multiply that 5,000 naira by the number of votes that can give him winning. That is the amount of money he has invested in this business, and he's going to recoup it with interest. You will see a lot of appointments that goes to people because those people are fronts or benefactors of sponsors of election processes. So instead of bringing the best mind to public space, people with connections are coming to public space. I listened to a channel this morning where they were analyzing the number of people that went to Dubai for the COP conference. And they were saying, I think the PDP even alleged that some of the people there are side chicks of government officials and all of those things. These things we have,
but that is
our electoral process,
Mr. Agaba, that is something we cannot verify. So I don't think it adds value if we echo that same sentiment.
Anyway, I place the references where exactly it lies. I said the PDP alleged. I didn't say they confirmed.
Right.
So that statement is mine, and I placed the reference
Mr.
where
Wilson,
it rightly
please,
belongs.
We would want you to hold your thoughts on that one. And let's take a look at, of course, other things with Mr. Steve. Now, Steve, let's talk about this debt ratio that we're talking about. I mean, we all know that the president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, also right now is seeking for the approval of more loans in order to finance some parts of the budget. So right now the fear is how will the federal government make sure that there will be good utilization of that fund in order for us not to be stuck in keep borrowing and not producing or not generating revenue from that debt that keeps piling up for the country? Steve, are you with us? Can you unmute your audio, please, because we can't hear you over here.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, well, your question it just boils down to the sincerity of leadership, the sincerity of the political leader. How much is he empathetic to the sufferings of Nigeria? So there's no other way to apply most of these resources except the posture, the kind of political leaders we recruit in these cycles elections. If we continue to recruit like the ones that Mr. Agada, Mr. Weston talked about, those who have invested so much and they are ready to recoup most of this money they invested during electioneering. So if we continue to have such crop of leadership, we will continue to have these same issues. The truth remains that it takes the posture of the president, it takes the posture of the subnational government leaders that will determine how much of these very resources, even the ones they borrowed, how much of it they are going to apply to infrastructures, to projects that will impact in the life of Nigeria, and also have a return on capital and principal to be able to repay most of these very loans. There is nothing wrong in borrowing. Like I earlier stated, Nigeria and the rest of developing countries needs a lot of investment in infrastructure. Like Mr. Wilson was trying to make a reference of United States, their spending priority or their strategic spending, it does not lie on those infrastructures. They have it. They are well developed. But here, we don't have those infrastructures. Our roads are still untied. You can still find gutters, not even potholes in our roads. Our aviation, we don't have the best of the aviation sectors. Our health sectors, we are still going to Dubai, US, London, Europe, and the rest for medical tourism. Name it. We are yet to have developed those very critical sectors. So our priorities will be spending on those critical national assets.
All right, so
Steve,
how do you advise the government to manage, to balance this, working with, thinking about the need to find way to reform or grow the Nigerian economy and also manage the debt ratio for the countries? How do you suggest that the federal government should implement? What are the policies they need to implement in order to make the balance of this and not put us deep into more debt?
It still boils down to that sincerity. It's still the sincerity. There's no better way to manage resources than to be sincere, corrupt-free. Duplication, wastages should be cut off. There is no other way. There's no miracle. There's nothing else he can do. He needs also to spend wisely, strategic spending. I keep saying we have a lot of deficiencies in our infrastructures. We are talking about education. We are talking about, in fact, recently we had a university base here in Abuja was barred not to admit law students anymore, only because they have, exhausted their quota. Imagine such scenarios. So we need to develop our education so that we can have more universities. In fact, what is currently going on, the existence of
yeah, go ahead, Mr. Steve. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. The existence of JAM is just only to streamline the number of our pupils that have been enrolled in university. Those cutoff marks is just to reduce, because the university system, our tertiary institutions have been overcrowded. That's why we are using the JAM to reduce and allocate number of people that will have access to our university. So we need a lot of investment in those areas: human capital development, infrastructural development. These are the areas Nigerians are expecting Mr. President to apply these very mega resources.
Right.
Now we are talking about, if we are looking at the debts in our budget, it's so huge. Government needed to reduce it, because already our issue is not around debt to GDP. The issues we have is revenue to debt service, or debt service to revenue. It's taking over 94-96%. That is where the issue is. We should not be running this rhetorics of we have a good, comfortable debt to GDP. Yes, it's somewhere less than 40 or 45%, where we have other countries, theirs is so close to 70, 80, if we are talking about the international best practice. But have you compared the infrastructures that exist? Take, for instance, a country like Japan that has the highest debt to GDP ratio. Japan has infrastructures. The rail system is here, the aviation, they have infrastructure that can repay most of those debts. But do we have? We don't have infrastructures, even at this 40% we have. So the question is not even the debt to, it's the existing infrastructure that can be tasked, that can be used, that can be a source of revenue.
Okay.
The rail system, if it's there, it will become a source of revenue for government.
Right.
If aviation is standardized, it will be a source of revenue for government.
Okay.
Not just debt to GDP. It's those infrastructures in existence. Where are they?
Mr. Stephen, if I could just get this question through, to double down on the cost of this huge debt profile, its impact on the economy, and also its long-term effect. Talk to us about what this may look like in the future, especially if you have to consider that this borrowing could affect future tax rises in the future, because we have to jack up our taxes if we want to pay off some of these debts in the future. And also, we have to cut down on some of the spending domestically if we're going to continue servicing our debt. As you said, 94% is pretty high. So give me a sense of if there is a one-size-fits-all, because, I mean, we keep mentioning some of these other big economies, and I get the sense that, as much as some of the economic principles are the same, there are certain differences, because of location, because of politics, because of culture, because of the history of a country that may make it different, where we cannot apply something similar from Japan to work here in Nigeria. So give me a sense of how we can square this circle.
Oh, thank you so much. I think the only implication or what it may look like in the future if we continue to be this very aggressive in borrowing and raising our debt profile, it will get to a point. In fact, even as at 2022, it got to a point, or even early this year, it got to a point that we will have to borrow from Mr. A to pay Mr. B. If our revenue to our debt service clocks 100%, it means that we don't have anything again to pay back what we have borrowed from our lenders. Government has to be mindful. Already we are in a debt crisis. In the next 4, 5, 6 years, most of these loans that we took in 2022, in 2023, and the ones that will come in 2024 that are on moratorium will be matured. They will be due in the next 4, 5 years. Some of these loans have some clauses that a sort of gestation period, 3 years, 2 years, 4 years. If in 2026, 2027, and 2028, we'll be having much higher debts to pay. That's the implication. And it will go to a point that it will rise like we did a couple of months ago, as I think around March, when it got to 120%, that we need to start borrowing from Mr. B to pay Mr. A. So we don't want to run into such. So the only thing government has to do is to be mindful of his borrowing. Now we have close to 10 trillion as what is expected government to borrow to augment the shortfalls of its budget size. So the budget itself needs to be reviewed.
Okay.
If we can have a headway.
Let's just for a moment there, Mr. Stephen. Let's bring back Mr. Wilson Agaba back into the conversation. We've heard this before. The government is broke. The federal government has re-echoed this message over and over again. I think recently also, former Governor Bagudu, who is Minister of Planning, did re-echo that. We're broke. And as an economist, what do you make of that message? Because it always is the precursor before a borrowing plan is either implemented or a request is sent to the National Assembly. It's almost like a conditioning, so that if Nigerians understand that we're broke, it then makes sense to borrow, because that's what people would do. If they don't have money, they either borrow or ask for help elsewhere. And do you get the sense that the government is normalizing this phenomenon, irrespective of its long-term damaging effects?
Let me tell you something that I so much have come to realize and understand about Nigerian politicians and the kind of leaders we have in the office. Most times, they come into the office and they are in a hurry to recoup what they have invested in their election. None of them. In fact, from my personal observation, I have noticed that none of these leaders are interested in long-term activities. If, for instance, as a broadcaster, you refuse to go to work, will you get salary? You won't get salary and you will become broke. Or if you are a businessman and your expenses begin to outweigh your revenue, you have to become innovative to jack up your revenue. When it comes to a national government, it takes a lot to bring in that innovation to fruition and to increase your revenue. But when we have people in government, you know, they usually want the ovation. Oh, he has done this. Mr. President, 100 days in office. Mr. President, 6 months in office. That is not how you fix a country that has been vandalized over the years like Nigeria. Nigeria needs a strategic, persistent, and consistent plan and conscious efforts to get out of where it is. For instance, how do we raise the revenue base of the country? How do we widen our tax net? Now, are you going to tax a man earning zero? Whatever percentage of zero you tax is going to be zero. So what we want to do is to put economic power in the hands of the citizen. And for a country like ours, the easiest place to begin is to begin to plant small businesses, which will give employment to a lot of people. And we have a lot of sectors to explore for that. Take, for instance, agriculture in our pursuit of food sustainability and food security. With the arable land we have, if the government truly invests with true collaboration with governors of the state who are the custodians of land, because one of our biggest challenges in agriculture is land. It is hard to find a large expanse of land that will support proper mechanization, which will collapse the cost of production and by implication reduce the cost of the prices of food products in the market. If the government does that, which is going to be a gradual process, co-opting the governors into the system, co-opting the local government into the system, co-opting the traditional rulers into the system, so that lands are made available and monies are tailored to real agricultural projects that will actually work and pay back the money, so that the money goes back there. We'll be giving job to a lot of people. And these people will be paying their withholding tax, their income tax, and all of that. And as they buy things that they need, we begin to earn VAT from it. So the more money you put in the hands of people, the more the government can earn. So we need to drive expansion of economic activities. But to do that, we need our judiciary to be functional.
I mean, at this point,
to do that,
if there is one thing that we've come to agree with, is the fact that the country needs to borrow, right? So how do you suggest, as a public affair analyst, that the federal government needs to curtail the level of corruption that has eaten deep into the system? Because just yesterday I was making reference to what is happening, in our daily life, how you see the little, even the people at the bottom of the chain, the ladder, trying to seek for something in return for that favor. So, and let's not forget, typical example of what happened in the PNID cases. We're talking about any bilateral agreements. The main fear is that when money comes into the country, there is always misappropriation. There is always somebody trying to siphon it for his own selfish reason. So how can the government be able to curtail the increase of corruption in the country, in order to at least make sure that that money that we're getting as debt is being used properly?
I think it was former President Muhammad Buhari who said that the number of people that are waiting to loot Nigeria is more than the current number of people looting Nigeria. And I think it was he who also said that if we do not treat the issue of corruption properly, a time will come when young Nigerians will think that corruption is a good way of life. It has come to the point where if you even get to a public office and you don't steal, your people tend to think that, what is this man doing? Why is he not taking like others? And they try to shame me. So the culture of corruption has sat very well with us. So when we have a leader, because a lot of power is resided in the president of Nigeria. So when we have a president, we should have a president who will take corruption head on. A president who, if he steps into the office, people will say, don't dare it, if he knows you are going to go down for it. It is the body language of a president that determines what happens in Nigeria. So we are going to need a president with strong character, with a strong body language to deter corruption. Because as you can see, all our corruption fighting agencies are in the hands of the president. The EFCC, the ICPC, and all of them. The president gets to nominate them for the National Assembly to confirm. So if we don't have a president who is purposive and who has the sincerity of purpose to drive down the level of corruption in Nigeria, there's not much we can do.
Okay.
It is always going to be chop, make we chop.
Right. Unfortunately, Nigerians really understand what that particular line means. But let's bring back Steve Nwachukwu back into the conversation and talk about, the varied opinions here, because you have people in government who see things differently, who disagree with, the concerns that have been raised by experts like you, for instance, who say that, listen, while we understand the apprehension, the frustration, as well as the the position of people who are criticizing the government's continued borrowing habit, we also can guarantee some level of economic growth in the near future that will make it worthwhile for us to go down this path. Judging from the body language, the economic reforms, and some of the things that the Tinubu administration is doing, I mean, just this morning, we can confirm that the FIRS has granted waivers on tax penalties as well as liabilities as its own gesture to make sure that businesses aren't continuing to struggle under the current economic climate. Let's juxtapose your concerns and how the government is reacting to those concerns that have been raised by Nigerians like yourself. Do you think the explanation makes sense, and does that, pacify you?
Honestly, yes. In as much as on daily basis, a good number of Nigerians are raising their concerns, publishing them, writing articles, appearing on national televisions, and raising issues of national concern. I know for sure, perhaps they are listening, but maybe they are paying deaf ear to most of those concerns raised by Nigerians. Are they doing much to correct most of these anomalies? I don't think they are doing much. Take, for instance, the movement, the traveling to Dubai, the one that is currently going on. Over 1,400 or thereabouts of Nigerians that accompany the president to COP28 in Dubai. These are the kind of spending and wastages Nigerians continue to point out on daily basis. We are talking about forest challenges, scarcities. Look at the number of monies that Nigerians will spend, hard currency in that very trip. So we have not seen much government is doing. We talked about the frivolosities in wastages, duplications, and wrong spendings in the budget line items. We just saw of recently where federal government is budgeting to purchase a yacht in a supplementary budget. We saw the number of SUVs being budgeted to purchase cars in the office of the First Lady's office and for the senators. So we have not seen a good reactions as a feedback in respect to on daily basis what Nigerians has been saying. So we have not been seeing. If the federal inland revenue gets some incentives or tax waivers, is a good response, but if you check the list and number of people they give, it could be also the cronies of government, those the government wants to favor. So we need to start seeing government being sincere in application, in strategic spending. So there is no better way to serve the nation, to tackle these very national issues than to be sincere, than to be sympathetic and empathetic to the sufferings of Nigeria. There is no better gesture, there's no better gift the government can give to Nigerians, except they are sincere, they deliver on these deliverables.
Okay.
Yes, definitely they will borrow. But applying those borrowed money into white elephant project will still cause more pains to us. That's what we are saying.
Let's talk about this wild elephant project that you are just talking about. Steve, are you with us? Let's talk about the white elephant project that you just mentioned right now. So what is the best sectors and industry that the federal government need to put? Because we need an insightful thoughts from people like you. So what do you think, where do you think the federal government needs to put this borrowed money into in order to make sure that they multiply or even quadruply, 4 times the money in order to make sure that we are out of this debt?
You cannot talk, you can't take away the issues around agriculture, because if the only way to tackle the rising inflation rate, rising living costs, rising food items is only when there is an aggressive investment in agriculture. We talk about investment in security. There is no way you get farmers to return to their ancestral homes or return to their farmlands except you granted peace in those very farming communities. Farmers have become fugitive in their home. So most of them have run away. Most of them pay ransom, pay taxes to bandits before they can access their farmland. So investment in security, investment in agriculture, investment in human capital development is very critical. And you cannot do that except you have a plan to aggressively pursue those very investments. It's not just like going like former President Buhari did, building rare projects, white elephant project that has no bearing economically to the lives of Nigeria. Yes, we need such infrastructures, but that is not the immediate needs of such infrastructure investment Nigeria needed. So as we speak now, because Nigerians are groaning in high cost of living, investment in security, investment in agriculture, investment in human capital development, and investment in education is very critical. These are the areas Steve, government needs to concentrate on.
Yeah. Okay, sorry to cut you short there, but pardon the interruption. Just to get the thoughts of Wilson Agaba before we wrap up, because we're running short of time now. Let me get your thoughts. For most people who know a lot about the global economy, Nigeria still has the largest economy on the African continent. Our GDP is 5 times bigger than all the other countries across West Africa. So it's safe to say that the potential is still there for Nigerians. Going forward, what would you like to see as far as, living within our means is concerned? I know financial experts like you would always, advocate for, spending only when it's necessary. I mean, we've highlighted the cost of governance as part of the problem, but for most people, even if we cut it significantly, it's still less than 1% of the problem. But give me a sense of the balancing act that needs to be done, considering the potential in our economy for it to grow, for it to expand, to create jobs, and be able to perhaps reposition Nigeria's prospect.
Thank you very much. To start with, not only are we advocating for the cost of governance to be reduced drastically, we are also advocating for the civil service to be looked into. There are a lot of duplication of duties there. There are a lot of redundant employees in the civil service that are being paid. We need to fix that and bring efficiency and effectiveness to the civil service space, because this is the very infrastructure upon which every other thing will sit. For instance, if I need to register a business, if I need to do my tax remittance, if I need to renew my passport, almost everything that I need to do sits on the civil service. And the government should concentrate on bringing effectiveness and efficiency to that aspect. That's number one. Number two, the government should be conscious, intentional about stimulating economic growth. I will give you an example. How much money did we put into government vehicles at the federal level and across the 36 states of the country? But we have vehicle manufacturers that are doing their own jobs here in Nigeria. Whether they are assembling or not, I don't care. They have started something. And the more money you put in their hands, the more they will need to produce, the faster they will learn, and the more money that will be available for research and development to improve the quality of their vehicle production. And then, because they are producing more, other supporting industry will become enticing enough for investors to come and invest in. For instance, we don't have flat iron sheet production in Nigeria, so most of them have to come from outside.
All right. Okay. I think we have lost the connection to Wilson Agaba there. And of course, we're going to have to end the conversation and anchor it right here, right now.